Hannah, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conversation this evening. I also would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and the traditional owners, on the land on which I'm gathered and I live and work, and you're gathered. I know they're probably different. I know there's people here from all over the state. So like Hannah, I'm on the land of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and I really acknowledge them as the first artists and creators of this country. I'd also like to welcome, obviously, Timothy and Belinda, and thank all of you for joining us, particularly Future Collective members. I've seen there's a few of you in the participants list, so a big shout out to you. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank the public programs team and Hannah, who have given us this opportunity tonight to speak together. And finally, before we start our conversation, I'd also just like to acknowledge Catherine and Margaret Middlehauser, who are two really amazing and inspirational women. Hannah has some images in front of us of the works that they've supported for the QAGOMA Collection, but aside from their philanthropic support, they are also very accomplished women in their own right. Margaret was the first female stockbroker in Australia, and Catherine was an eminent plant physiologist and an amazingly knowledgeable person who just continues to pursue her interests in art and antiquities. So I just wanted to acknowledge them because they've been such tremendous supporters of the gallery. So Belinda and Tim, can I just check, are you guys ready to chat?
All good.
Great, excellent. Well, Belinda, if you don't mind, I might start with you tonight, and Hannah, if I can trouble you to move to the next slide. So Belinda, we've known each other for quite a few years now because you joined, sorry, just before I kick off, here is some lovely photographs of Catherine Middlehauser and Margaret, and you can see Catherine there at the recent opening of the Two Sisters exhibition. So thank you, Hannah. And we might go to the next one. Belinda first joined the Future Collective in 2015, and I'm just really interested to hear from you about what attracted you to joining the program. It's a program for young benefactors, so it'd be good to know about why you decided to sign up.
Sure. So for me, it was about meeting and spending time with like-minded people. So other people that are passionate about art and the gallery specifically. And also what really sold it to me was the vote each year. It's my favorite thing on the annual calendar with the gallery to go and have a group of people be able to cast a vote for a work that will then be acquired by the gallery is much fun.
That's right. And just to explain, if you're not familiar with the Future Collective, the members all donate $1,000 a year. And at the end of the year, we have an event where the curators pitch usually 3 to 4 works, and the group collectively vote to decide what the gallery uses to or acquires with their funds. So it's the highlight of the events program for that group, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And Belinda, around the same time that you joined the Future Collective, you and your husband Darren also separately supported the gallery, and you helped us to acquire a series of works. And Hannah, I don't know if you can move the PowerPoint along, but it'd be really nice to show the next image of, this is a number, but not the full series of flag works by a Singaporean artist called Sharon Chin, or Malaysian actually, that we acquired for APT 8. And I'm interested to know what made you, before that you'd been engaged in the gallery in various ways, and what shifted your engagement, or what motivated you to give us some support to acquire these works?
Sure. You're right. We had been engaged with the gallery for a number of years at that point, through the members program mostly, and through public programs as well. And the members team are exceptional at what they do, and the events are so engaging, and it helped us because we became members when we first moved to Brisbane. It really made us feel like we already developed a bit of a community when we were new to Brisbane. So it was that relationship that made us think about supporting the gallery further. And then we were given some really good advice about giving while you're living. So we definitely wanted to get into being more philanthropic, and this was the perfect place for us to do that with the connections we already had and the relationships we had, and the gallery is our favourite place. So
well, we're very happy that you made that decision, obviously. And since that time, I guess our relationship and our conversations have evolved to the point where you've now supported two major commissions, one by Queensland artist Dale Harding and another by Queensland-born, Sydney-based artist Daniel Boyd. As well as a really large-scale work by Rico Rennie. And Hannah, if you could just flick to maybe the next couple of images so that we can show these works. This is the Rico Rennie. So I'd really be grateful if you could share, what drew you to supporting Indigenous art?
Sure, it's probably good luck more than good management. So each of the works have their own story with us, particularly with Dale's work. The first Future Collective event that we came to was QAGOMA Q, and one of Dale's works was in that, and Dale was actually at the event. So we had a really interesting conversation with Dale, which was actually about the other works in that show. So we knew that we wanted to support Dale with QAGOMA to see something come to life, and the fact that we were given the opportunity to support such a large scale work that was directly onto the gallery walls was amazing. When it comes to Rico's work, which we're looking at now, it was actually pitched to the Future Collective group and wasn't a winning pitch. It was hung in the gallery very close to Daniel Boyd's work. So we spend a lot of time with the artworks that we support. So we kept seeing this and it just kept, drawing us in. So we had a conversation, and that's how we came about supporting this work. When it comes to Daniel's work, it was actually pitched to the another group at the gallery, the Contemporary Patrons group, and was unsuccessful, but it's a really important piece for the gallery's collection because it was telling a story that wasn't actually reflected in the collection at that time. So, and the fact that it turned out as brilliantly as it did was amazing. So it's been exciting to be able to get involved with works that you can't see when you're committing to support them. So it's been good fun.
And that's really interesting, Belinda. Thanks, Hannah. This is the Daniel Boyd work. It's quite brave of any donor to support a new commission because you really don't know what the outcome will be. And I'm keen to hear, what was that like for you? Was there any trepidation, or were you open to the process?
Very open to the process. And I think what has helped is our relationship and the conversations that we continue to have over the extended period of time, because you were able to provide me with a book of Daniel's work, and I hadn't seen his work before. And honestly, I think I was on about the third page and I was like, oh yeah, no, this will be great, because he has such a unique style and practice, and this work is obviously one of my favorites. And so, and having met Dale and seen his previous works, there was never any concern it would be anything other than exceptional. So, and yes, I do agree that there's a small bit of faith and trust in going forward with supporting a work that you can't see yet, but it has never been an issue at all.
And Belle, do you, now that you've gone on this journey and you've supported 3 works independently of your other Future Collective membership, do you have a favourite?
I really don't. I don't have a favourite work. I have a favourite Future Collective work. That one's easier for me. The works that Darren and I have supported individually, they all have such a special place in my heart. And like I say, we tend to visit with them and spend time with them. they're all unique and very special.
Excellent. And when you first supported the Sharon Chin works that we saw earlier, you did that anonymously. And now for the keen observers in the presentation, you'll see that Belinda and Darren are credited as helping us to acquire those works. So what made you change your mind and decide that you were happy to be acknowledged in that way?
We are quite private people, although my husband more so than me. So we did consider continuing to be acknowledged as being anonymous. And then really what we found was by having our name on the plaque, on the wall next to the artwork, it could encourage and open up conversations with other people about the process of giving and what that's like, and hopefully encourage others to look into it further and become involved themselves, because it's been such a wonderful part of our lives now that we absolutely intend to continue on with. And it was just about being open and transparent so that those conversations could take place.
And I know from the gallery's perspective, you know, we always really encourage individuals who are supporting us, if they're comfortable, to do it publicly, because it shows, you know, the support that we have in the community. And it also, in your particular case, Belinda and Tim, I think people often have an idea that our benefactors are of a certain age and a certain type of person, and so we're always very keen to break down those stereotypes. So we're incredibly grateful when people are willing to put their name against their support in a public way. So thank you. Lastly, Belinda, one last question for you, sure. And before we bring Tim into the conversation about his giving, if you haven't seen the Two Sisters exhibition yet, you may not know that we all know it celebrates Catherine and Margaret's giving, but they were very deliberate in their giving, and they largely supported the acquisition of work. So they gave the gallery money and we acquired it. And over 30 years, there's over 100 works in the collection of varying values, but that are all really incredibly useful and meaningful. And so I guess I'm interested, because you and Darren have begun a similar journey, if you have ever considered collecting art yourself, or do you do that? And
yeah, no, we don't. So our house the walls are full of things from our travels. So they're all personal items, usually picked up very cheaply while we're on holidays, and it's really just memories on our walls. And for us particularly, we think that art should be enjoyed by the masses, and it's for the people. So it means so much to us to see art hanging on the walls at the Queensland Art Gallery that so many people can enjoy and experience and learn from.
That's wonderful. And you know, as in the role that I have at the gallery, I'm always interested in what motivates people to give, and this is probably a good point to bring you into the conversation, Tim, because your giving is quite different to Belinda's, and you joined the Future Collective, and I'll say this, I hope this is the right way to say it, when you really didn't have to. You were already a foundation member, you have a long association with the gallery in various ways. And so I'm really interested in why did you know, you could have, in some ways, your level of giving or support meant that you didn't have to also do that as well. And so I'm keen to hear what was your motivation for joining the group?
Yeah, that's Good question. I first started giving to the foundation, I think, in the 2010 appeal, which was for a magnificent group of Morning Star poles, which were all made on Galawinku and now form a central part of our Indigenous collection. But a few years later, I think we were having, you know, some corridor chat, and it was mentioned that this group would be coming together. And I just thought it would be a great way to connect with people my own age who are interested in art as well. You know, as we've said before, the average demographic that you think would be going to events is older, but there are actually quite a lot of young people who are interested in getting involved in culture. And this was a good way for me to meet other people around my own age group who also shared the same passions I do.
And Tim, part of your relationship with the gallery in giving, you know, towards appeals and the Future Collective was really where you began, but you've also gifted works and rare books to the gallery as well from your own private collection. So I would, and I'm sure those with us here tonight would really be keen to hear about how you started collecting and what that process was for you as well.
I was very fortunate, I guess, to grow up in a household where my grandparents were around quite a lot. So we always had objects lying around the house that had stories. Everything in the house somebody could point to and say, oh, this is where it came from. And that was really interesting to me as a child, and I think also inspired me to take a career in art as well. Each year we'd also go and visit my cousin, and she'd have all of these absolutely mad things around her house. I remember this really amazing red chair that had leopards as the legs, that held balls on their feet to the armrests, and that intrigued me as a kid. And got me really motivated about finding things of my own. So as I started earning my own money and doing art history, an art history degree at the University of Queensland, I started buying my own things. And slowly but surely over the last 15 years, I've gone through and collected things for my own home. But because I'm a bit of an impulsive and compulsive collector, I think at times I need to move some stuff on as well.
And Tim, if for those who are here with us now and who might watch later on, who are interested in becoming a collector or starting to collect art, what advice do you have them now after 15 years of experience of how to begin? Because it can be quite daunting.
Oh, it can be. I agree. When you first go to, like, for a lot of people, the hardest thing is stepping into the art gallery doors in the first place, because they're unfamiliar places for a lot of people. But I think that the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. You start to get to know the dealers and their staff, and you develop relationships there. And there's not necessarily any pressure to buy either. You're certainly able to go into private galleries just to look at the art. Dealers are always happy for you to do that. When I was studying art history, my great lecturer, Rex Butler, used to say, you know, or go to as many openings as you can. It's how you see the art, it's how you meet the artist. I guess when it comes to actually finding that piece that you like and you really want to invest in, my biggest thing that I say to somebody is, can you live with this on your wall for a long time? Because it really is an investment in yourself, and you get a lot of joy from having something beautiful in your home for a long time. And that doesn't mean that it has to be lots of money either. It can be quite small. I actually have a big ceramics collection, and some of those works have only been sort of $50 or $100. And then there are some bigger ticket pieces that I've had to scrimp and save for a long time as well.
And Hannah, if you could move the PowerPoint along, I'd love to share with everyone the William Dagi works. because this is a demonstration, or you can see in the image, of a work that we have in the collection, and then a study that Tim gave to the gallery earlier this year. And Tim, can you tell us a little bit about these works?
Yeah, Bill Dagi's probably very, very well known as one of the greatest portraitists in Australia of the 20th century. He won, I think, 8 Archibald Prizes, a phenomenal record, and was really celebrated as a painter who really knew how to get the best likeness out of his subjects. The work on the left is a work in the QAGOMA Collection. It won the 1956 Archibald Prize, and it's of the Arunte painter Albert Namatjira. Dagi met Namatjira in 1956 down in Sydney, and he took several sketches of him. And in this work, he decided to paint him on country. We're very fortunate actually in Brisbane to also have an oil study for this work in the UQ Art Museum collection that was collected by Dr. Norman Bien, and he bequeathed that equally to Stuart Home and the University of Queensland. But that work won the prize, and on the right is a work that I picked up 4 years ago now, and it relates to that work, but it more closely relates to a portrait that's in the National Portrait Gallery, which depicts that exact view of Namatjira looking out across country in profile. We've got a modest collection of works by Dagi in QAG, including a really lovely portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. It's one of the 3 or 4 versions out there, and it was commissioned by Sir Leon and Lady Trout, who were former trustees of the gallery, after they saw the original. But seeing these kind of sketches shows the artist's working process, and you see from very early on that Dagi had a really strong sense of what he wanted to depict when he looked at Namatjira. And I think he's even quoted as saying that Namatjira had this strong inner dignity that made him one of the most interesting people to capture the likeness of.
And Tim, can I ask, how long did you have this work in your own collection before you gave it to the gallery?
So I picked this up at auction in 2016, and it has been sitting in my home ever since then. During the COVID closure, I was keeping myself busy and keeping my skills in check by doing some live streams to an Australian pottery collectors group. During that, I decided to pull out some of my pieces of Hermannsburg pottery, and I brought this study down to show part of the history of Hermannsburg and the great watercolour movement that came out of there through Namatjira. And at that time, when I was about to put it back up on the wall, I thought, no, it's time for it to go somewhere now. You know, I've had some lovely years with it.
Oh, well, we're very glad that you did. So thank you, Tim. And Hannah, if we could go to the next slide, you can see a really rare book that Tim also gifted to the collection. Now, this is, it's a book, but it has a series of photographs by Thomas Pringle that it's called Maori Studies Permanent Carbonet Photographs. Tim, I think you're better to talk about this work than me, but I'm also keen to hear, you know, again, how long did you have this for, and is it hard to part with things, and have you ever had any regret on giving things away?
This one I actually didn't have for terribly long at all. I was browsing around an antique centre one day, and I saw this in one of the shops, and I thought, oh, this one would actually be nice for the gallery. QAG has a pretty impressive collection of contemporary New Zealand work, and I think we might actually have the best collections of Michael Parakofai and a couple of other artists, Lisa Rahana as well, outside of New Zealand. And in actually those two artists reference historic culture quite a lot. And when I saw this album, I thought this is a piece that could be used by the gallery in terms of research, not just for our own curators, but also for artists that might be coming to the collection to have a look at things. Thomas Pringle came to New Zealand, and he was a photographer. He went around and did a lot of landscape views. These are very commercial scenes that he did. Carbonet photos were fairly easy to produce and quick to produce, so he could make these albums up and sell them as tourist trade. These works, I think there's 8 or 12 photographs in the album, and they're all of women, which is interesting and telling of its time. It's in some of them you can see on the lower right corner, the young lady there. There's a number of photos of her, and I would describe that as sort of a gently sexualized image. There's this element of the exotic there. And whereas we don't like to engage with our subjects that way, and I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that this happened in the past, and this is also fodder for artists of today and in the future to consider, both in terms of how they want to represent their own work, but how they marry up this history with their own as well. Yeah, so they're political pieces. They still live, even though it's a very historic object. I think it still has life to live. Getting back to your question about whether it's hard to part with some things, yes, it can be. A couple of years ago, I had to, well, I didn't have to, I got to go over to London to do some weightlifting over there for the International LGBT Powerlifting Championships. And after I came back, there was a whole lot of ephemera and merchandise that I had, and I kept it for a little bit of time, but then I thought, no, I should send this somewhere for posterity. So I sent it down to the Australian Lesbian and Gay Archives in Melbourne. And there was a bit of a moment there when I did that, because I was giving something that I'd actually invested in myself. So it can be hard at times. Other times, like with these, it's really joyful to be able to help.
And Tim, you made a couple of really good points in telling those stories. One that lots of artists use. I mean, some of our audience may not be aware that we have a resource library at the gallery that students and artists come in and use, and we have quite a significant artist archive as well that they use when they're doing their own research on artists or responding to a work in the collection. So it's really valuable, and these will be tremendously valuable as well. But I was just struck when you were talking about that, about how generous it was of you to acquire it with almost that idea that you would give it to the gallery, and thinking about who would use it and who would benefit from it as well, which is not unusual when people are philanthropic, but it sometimes comes at a later point when they're at the point of giving, not at the outset. So it's a really great story to hear how you kind of decided to acquire it and then give it to us as well. And you're right, I think it will be well used, and it has a really nice connection to our collection, which is great too. Now, Hannah, if I could trouble you to move on to some of the next slides. So we've talked about some of Tim and Belinda's giving, but we wanted to also share some images of the works that the Future Collective over the last 5 years have acquired for the gallery through their giving and then their voting process. So you can see there's a series of photographs by Naomi Hobson, a Dani Mello work, and these are very important works by artists that have a strong connection to Queensland. Naomi is based in Far North Queensland, and Dani doesn't live in Queensland, but he has a very strong family connection to it. And if we could move to the next one as well. Thanks, Hannah. You'll also see the very first series of works by Abdullah, the Coming to Terms series that the Future Collective supported, and a commission for Tony Albert when he had a show at the gallery. So one thing that might not be, and maybe we'll just do the next one, Hannah, or if there's another slide, that strikes me about the Future Collective is in this suite of works, there's quite a few commissions as well. And they're a very adventurous group, I think, for lack of a better description. Would you agree with that, Belinda and Darren? Yeah. Keen to support artists to create new work, and the focus of the groups collecting is early to mid-career Australian artists. So having now been long-term members and big advocates for the group, what is your favourite? Do you have a favourite as well of these works?
Yes. The works that are currently up on the screen here, the Helen Johnsons, they're actually my favourite works that we've been able to acquire over the year. It was interesting hearing Belinda talk earlier about that sense that you get when you're buying something that doesn't exist yet. And I still remember sitting in the pitch for this year in 2016, and they had indicative images, but they didn't have any actual images to show of these works, because the idea was that Helen was going to look through our collection and then draw out her own work from works in our collection. And that's proved to be really valuable for us, because these contemporary works have been hung a couple of times against really historic works in the collection, major works, one of them by Vidalet, and one of them by the Vidalet work that is referenced is in the right-hand work, and AME Bale's Leisure Moments is referenced in the left-hand work. They're works that for me are really, really rewarding, because you keep on coming back to look at them and you see something new. And it's not just a case of what you see is what you get. You go back and you wonder why something's there, and you'll do a bit of research, and then you'll find that, oh, she's referencing this moment here. So there's a lot of really interesting discussion about the undercurrent of women's work and the suffragette movement in particular in these two works, which was very strong in Brisbane in those early years of the 20th century.
Great. And what about you, Belinda? Do you have a favourite?
I do. My favourite is actually the first one that the group acquired, which is the Abdullah work. I remember the pitch that we had for that work. It was a great pitch. And I remember being very pleased that the thing I voted for was acquired, which is always good. And I absolutely love that series. It's very engaging for me. And funnily, talking about the way the artworks have been hung, Tim, I have loved the fact that a number of these works have also been used in exhibitions that have been related to the Brisbane International Film Festival, which is another passion. So every time I see one of these works pop up, I'm like, yay.
And can you both tell us a little bit about the voting in the pitch? Because I'm interested to know, how have you felt if you haven't, the work you voted for hasn't won? What's that been like? Do you want to go first, Tim?
Okay. Last year we had a pitch that I actually couldn't attend. I was down in Melbourne, I think, at that time of year, and the group was really, really kind, and they sent everything through, the PowerPoint and everything, so I could still place a vote even though I wasn't going to be there in person on the evening. So my absentee vote was recorded, but I had voted for a beautiful hand-painted, hand-sewn possum skin cloak by Dr. Carol McGregor. And that work was unsuccessful. Last year, we acquired a work by a emerging light-based artist, Tari Mackenzie, which is now very happily in the collection and will be displayed in a show, I think, next year or the year after. But I was a little bit disappointed in that possum skin cloak not being acquired. And I think even when I was pitching my vote, I'd said, you know, this is an incredibly important object for our collection because it tells a story that we don't already have. And it was just replete with so much Queensland history through it. Dr. McGregor had been so meticulous in her research, both in terms of the use of possum skins as clothing up here in Queensland. It's traditionally something that we think of being inherent within communities of Indigenous people down in the south of Australia, but it was as high as up here. And also all of the hand-painted details of the natural bush tucker and the flora and fauna of this region as well. Most of which we don't see anymore because the topography of Brisbane has completely changed. Very fortunately, I think only at the last Trustees meeting or the meeting before then, that work did come into the collection through, I think, the generosity of the Carides family. So it's still there. I'm very happy, but yeah. So I remember being a little bit upset when that one didn't get through.
Yeah, and how about you, Belinda?
I am on a winning streak, which I don't intend to lose. But Tim, I think I have a funny story for you based on last year's vote. I voted for the light work, obviously, but I had a conversation with 2 or 3 other people from the group immediately following the vote and finding out which item won. And we all said, I really want the possum cloak, but I voted for the light work. None of us could explain to each other why we had gone that way, but it was like that last minute snap change of mind. So yeah, we were all very attached to the possum cloak.
Yes,
it is a lovely work, and I'm looking forward to seeing it out on display.
Yes. And we also have to admit, you know, as staff at the gallery, when a work wins the pitch, we're always very happy for that artist and for the curator, but also a little bit sad for the curators whose work doesn't win, and then that's where my job comes in, to go and find someone else to help us acquire the work. So it does mean more work for me, but I'm happy to do that. So well, I'd like to thank you both. I'm just keeping an eye on our time. Thank you both, Tim and Belinda, for talking about your giving. I'm so grateful to you both for sharing those stories, and also for your support, because as you would have seen in this presentation, there's some really wonderful things in the collection now for us all to enjoy, because you've given them to the gallery for the people of Queensland. So Hannah, I think you've just sent me through a question actually from Gillian. Hi Gillian, and thank you for your question. Tim, Gillian would like to know if you can tell us about the work behind you over your shoulder.
Oh, okay. That is a work by Juan Ford, a Melbourne-based painter. It's an oil on linen, 2009 work. I could be wrong there. It's either 2008 or 2009. It's called Nothing Rhymes with Orange, and Juan's been working on these series of destroyed flora images or partially destroyed flora images, probably for the last 15 years or so. He's been building up a really steady practice of that. He's always been quite concerned with environmentalism, and that's a key theme throughout a lot of these works. I bought this work after seeing a picture of it in a magazine. It was coming up to the Melbourne Art Fair, and this work was actually used as Diane Tanz's advertisement for the Melbourne Art Fair. And I said, oh, you know, I really like his work. I could afford his work back then. He's gone up considerably in value now. So I emailed the gallery and I said, oh, look, am I able to have a price list for the works on display? And I got an email back saying there's only one left. It is the one that's in the advertisement. However, we can't give you the image of it because it isn't finished yet. As most artists do, they're working right up until the moment. So I bought it on spec. I hadn't seen it, and I you know, to use Sir Frank Packer's quote, I bit off more than I could chew, and certainly did bite off more than I could afford, and chewed like hell to get through over several months. So very generous to let me pay it off over a few months, and then had it sent up here, and it has been living with me ever since. It will come to QAG one day, but not for a very, very long time. I like it too much. And that relates to my thing of you need to be happy with something being on your wall for forever and a day, because every morning I wake up and I see this and I go, yeah, I'm happy to have that.
It brings you joy.
It does.
Well, thank you, Tim. Now we have a couple more questions. So first one I'll take is from Adam. Hi, Adam. Thank you for submitting a question. Adam would like to know, can we repeat the name of the artist that did the light work that we've been talking about? And that would be Tari McKenzie. Tim and Belle, would that be right? Yep. Yes.
Yes.
And I should explain, we don't have an image of her work in this presentation because we haven't put it on display yet. So, and really the best way to appreciate the work, I think, is to either see it in real life or see a video of it. It's a really interesting way that she uses light and reflects light across different mediums. So thank you, Adam, for the question. Now, Angela also has submitted a question that is, do we know what the letters HNDFWMIAFN mean for Daniel Boyd's painting? Belle, I think this is a question for you.
Yes. The short answer is no, I don't. However, I did ask Bruce, who was the curator at the time when that work came into the gallery, and he did share with me, because my understanding is Daniel does this with his works and he doesn't share what the meaning is. However, he let slip that it is related to lyrics in a Kanye West song. I've spent many an hour Googling trying to figure out what song it is and what it is, but I still don't know, but I think that's pretty cool.
Yes, and I give you kudos for listening to that much Kanye West. Well done, that's commitment.
I've tried very hard and I've got nothing.
Now, we also did have a question about moving the line, which is the Tony Albert work, also in this slide that the gallery commissioned for Tony's show that was now over 2 years ago, I think, around this time 2 years ago. Tim, did you want to talk about that work?
Yeah, so Tony's not only a long-term friend of the gallery, used to be employed by the gallery, like many emerging artists are. We have a great track record of having young artists working in various teams, and he worked in the education team, but then developed, I think to most people in this discussion, you'd all know that he has had a rather stellar career with some very important things. But he's also a close friend of the Future Collective and has been, I think, our ambassador once. And he is also a long-term Future Collective member and donor to the gallery as well. This work is made up out of all of his collections, his various collections of playing cards. And ever since he was a little kid, he was going around to op shops and antique shops with his family and picking up little bits of kitsch, which had quite a lot of significance to him as a young Indigenous boy, because they were representations of Indigenous people that didn't necessarily correlate with his experience. So his acts of incorporating these works into his practice is to actually reclaim some of that. And this work was commissioned by the Future Collective and then included in the finished work, was included in the show as well. And you can see a whole heap of motifs that he has used throughout his practice in there. From there's a lot of skulls in there, there's a lot of bullets in there that represent darker shades of history as well. But then there's also sort of his Space Invaders things as well, and a bit more pop cultural reference.
Well done, Tim. You've got a wonderful memory. We were really thrilled to acquire that work, but that is a nice aspect of the Future Collective, is that often the works that they help us support go on display in exhibitions or collection displays fairly soon after they're acquired, which is really rewarding, I would say. Tim and Belinda, you can advise, but say for the members as well, that opportunity to see them in real life, and also for others to enjoy them so soon after they've come into the collection. We do have time for more questions, so if anyone does have any, please feel free to send them through. I just also wanted to make one last question for you, Belinda and Tim, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. So when people support the gallery or visit the gallery, I think often they think about exhibitions, and what the gallery does is exhibitions, and they think about artworks in terms of exhibitions. So I'm keen to know, when did you start to, and Tim, you probably did this very early on because you've had a very long relationship with the gallery, but when did you start to shift your focus from, or did your focus start to incorporate the collection as well, or was that a distinction for you at all?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. When I was doing my art history degree, you have to, follow due process and acknowledge all of the artworks that you're including in your references. So that includes the credit line, and it became very quickly apparent to me that there were the collections are built upon people's generosity. You repeatedly see individuals being used, individual names, being mentioned on credit lines. And that's really interesting because when you start looking into that further, you also get a idea of an individual's taste as well. But yeah, I'm not sure when there was a crossover. I've had a very long relationship with the gallery, so I think I've always been aware that people make the gallery what it is, and a lot of generosity has gone into creating the collection the way it is now. One thing that I like about the Future Collective is that these works that people are seeing now, the Tony Albert, the Abdullah, they're works that I would love to have on my walls, but I will never afford something of that scale myself. They're also works that really do belong in a public institutions. So the ability to be able to contribute to that in a small way, and the fact that 50 emerging collectors can pitch in a little bit of money to make a big pool of money that you can buy something very, very nice from is actually quite satisfying.
Great, Tim. What about you, Belinda?
I guess the concept of the collection outside of the exhibitions, really, I learned more so through the members program. So one of the things that we did as part of that was understand the way artwork is hung in a space and how it talks to each other, and those sorts of concepts, which I had never picked up myself. Having spent an enormous amount of time in the gallery looking at works, I don't think I'd ever picked up the nuance of the thought that goes into that. And then seeing your storage space in the gallery and the amazing works that are held within the storage space, which obviously just get their time to shine within the exhibitions as well. So once I started to understand the concept of the full collection and how it's used by the gallery, it really did highlight to me, much like Tim, the importance of individuals contributing in any way that they can, and, you know, and particularly younger people engaging with the gallery in every possible way to make sure that, you know, this continues for future generations.
Thank you, Belle. We have one last question from Adam. So thank you, Adam. Another great question coming through. Adam has asked, not directly linked to philanthropy though, can emerging Australian artists donate their work directly to the gallery? So Adam, the answer to that is yes. And anyone can offer work to donate to the gallery, and there's a process that the curators go through, and Tim would know this actually from gifting things, not his own work, but gifting things, where when work is offered to be gifted to the gallery, the first thing we do is refer it to the curatorial collection area. So if it's Australian art, international art, Asian art, Pacific art, for the curators to consider the work alongside the rest of the collection and how it fits with the collection, because there's some works that are amazing work, but they're not really best suited to our collection, and there's other institutions that have a more comprehensive collection of those works or focus on that area. So we have a collection policy, and the curators assess the work against that and the collection itself and look for gaps and relationships between the works, and then decide. So yes, the answer is yes, and then it's really the beginning of a conversation where the curators then make an assessment, and finally, Tim mentioned this earlier, it all goes to our Board of Trustees, who are responsible for signing off on the approval of those works. So and
I guess if I can jump in there as well, at the same time that I pitched the Dagi sketch, I actually had another couple of works which didn't come through. One of those works that I suggested to the gallery was actually a vase, this very strange thing, Frau Royth porcelain vase, that had Australian birds on it, and the understamp was that it was actually used as a fundraiser for the World War I German returned servicemen's, the equivalent of their RSL. Now, looking at QAG's collection policy and looking at our collection strengths in international decorative arts, we have some really beautiful pieces of 18th century Sèvres porcelain. We've got some great export ware from Asia and some European ware that cites Asian taste and chinoiserie. We have a really good collection of early 20th century French glass. And then we have a really good collection of deco ceramics by Wedgwood, especially the Keith Murray pieces that some people may be familiar with. So this vase didn't make it through because the collection can't really do it justice, but other institutions may be equally interested in something like that, where they've got more works that they can sit it alongside, and it's less of a white elephant and it actually lifts up their collection.
That's a great example. Thanks, Tim. I wasn't even aware of that. Well, I think Hannah is telling me that we are nearly at time. So I really wanted to firstly thank everyone who has joined this discussion. We are thrilled that you have given up your Thursday night to be part of this conversation, and thank you for sending through such fantastic questions. And also thank you, Tim and Belinda, for sharing your stories of giving and experiences, and also for just being so generous to the gallery as well. We're really grateful. So thank you.